Hello, guys. You're on podcast Katsyn Global Report, and today you will be able to watch a very interesting interview which I recorded yesterday with Dr. Robert Hamilton, who is a leading specialist in geopolitics, and also he serves as a president of Delphi Global Research Center. With Dr. Hamilton, we discussed in detail the state of international law, the state of international institutions, the state of international world order. Since in the end of February, the United States and Israel decided to launch a special military operation against Iran, which constantly represented a threat to neighboring states during the last decades. Unfortunately, international institutions, they could not find their own answer how to tackle Iranian threat, how to eliminate Iranian threat. So it caused and it led to the decision by Israel and the United States to act together in order to eliminate Iranian threat. And obviously, with Dr. Hamilton, we discussed, do this special military operation fall under the scope of international law? Do we really need the kind of legal backup from the side of Security Council of United Nations organization? Or simply we now live in the situation when states can decide on their own to eliminate the threat if international institutions can't provide a proper answer. So please listen to this, watch this interview, listen to it. It's really interesting, and please leave your comments. It will be interesting to read them. Thank you. We come back, dear audience. I'm very happy to introduce my today's guest, Dr. Robert Hamilton, who serves as the president of the Delphi Global Research Center. Also, he served 30 years in the U.S. Army, retiring as a colonel, and 6 years as a civilian professor at the U.S. Army War College. Dr. Robert, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Mihailo. Good to be with you.
Yeah, me too. So, Dr. Robert, we just watching what is happening right now in Iran, and even though there was a premise that there will be a civil unrest, people will try to topple the government, Iranian government, we see a quite opposite direction. People actually, or at least part of the nation, are rallying around the flag. So quite opposite from what we expected. What is going on in Iran, and what is your assessment of this campaign which was launched by U.S. and Israel?
So I think there are several things going on, and I think you're right to note that maybe not everybody in the U.S. government or the U.S. military believed that the regime was that brittle and that would collapse that quickly, or believed that the Iranian people would rise up. But certainly some people did. And it appears that those were planning assumptions, right? That the regime was fairly brittle and that it did not have the support of the Iranian people. So I think what you're seeing here is that those assumptions are proving untrue, right? And in any military plan, at least, you have to explicitly list your assumptions, and then you have to have a backup plan or plans if those assumptions turn out to be untrue. And so that's where we are now in Iran. And as to the why did the regime not collapse? Why did they have the Iranian people, at least to this point, not risen up to try to take it, to try to change their government? I think there's a couple of things. First of all, Iran expected this and has been expecting this for decades. It's been very clear to the Iranian regime that it was an enemy of Israel. Certainly, it's an existential enemy of Israel, and that it was a major enemy of the United States. As far back as the George W. Bush administration, Iran was part of the axis of evil, right? With Iraq and North Korea. This is prior to 2003, the invasion of Iraq. So the Iranian regime has been expecting this and has penetrated Iranian society very effectively. And the regime operates on multiple levels. And so it has penetrated very deeply into obviously the political system, but also the social system of Iran. And so when you take out, this is not a small terrorist organization where when you take out the top leadership, the organization might cease to function, right? the regime is continuing to function and just at lower levels. And so many lower level, mid-level, and lower level bureaucrats in the Iranian government know what to do in the absence of top leadership. And so you're seeing the government still functioning. Why have the Iranian people not risen up? Well, I think there's several reasons. First of all, the regime killed tens of thousands of them earlier this year. So obviously that's a deterrent to mass public action. Secondly, frankly, I think we have to be honest as Americans, when the U.S. calls for you to rise up and overthrow the government, our history on that count is not great. We've done that before. George Bush very famously did it. George Bush 41. H.W. Bush famously did it in the aftermath of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And when the Shia in southern Iran and the Kurds in the north did rise up, they were massacred and the U.S. didn't step in. So there's not a lot of trust, frankly, I think, among the Iranian people that the U.S. will be there for them to protect them if they take to the streets and try to overthrow the regime.
I'm quite skeptical, as probably you are, when people are stigmatized or labeled according to their political views or political perceptions. So being Jewish, I'm a Jewish and I have a high respect towards Israel. I have many relatives, friends there, and obviously I very sensitive about what's going on in Israel. Since I think that this is normal when me, you, some other people criticize some policies by Prime Minister Netanyahu or some other political leadership, and it's quite strange when people who are critical about specific policies of Netanyahu is labeled as anti-Semites, etc. So do you foresee here any problem when people, without any general assessment of their point of view, actually from the start is labeled as anti-Semites who simply doesn't like Israel no matter what? They simply criticize separate policies, especially unplanned or badly planned operation against Iran.
Yeah, so Mihailo, we're having this debate in the U.S., right? And I'll tell you where I land on this debate. Criticizing policies of Israel does not make you anti-Semitic, period, full stop. Israel is a state. The Jewish people are either an ethnic group or a religious group, right? So ethnic and religious bigotry is absolutely unacceptable in any form, period. But criticizing things that the state of Israel is doing is different than criticizing the ethnic or religious group called Jews, right? So I think we have to separate those things. Again, we're having that debate here in the U.S. right now. There are people in the U.S. who say the same thing. If you're critical of Israel, you must be anti-Semitic. That is absolutely untrue. I don't buy it, and I've never believed it. Now, in terms of this joint U.S.-Israeli operation, I think U.S. and Israel probably have different goals, and it'll be interesting to see. I think Israel wants to destroy the Iranian state completely, and I think regime change is the Israeli goal. And President Trump has at times said regime change is the U.S. goal, and then the U.S. military has been far more circumspect. They've listed the goals as destruction of the drone and missile program, destruction of the Iranian Navy, and destruction of the defense industrial base of Iran. Those are military objectives. I think the U.S. military probably would say mission accomplished when it finishes those. The problem with that is then you don't ever go to war just for military reasons. You always go to war for political and military reasons. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. If the U.S. sort of declares its military objectives met and declares victory, does Israel keep fighting? And does the U.S. have the leverage to incentivize or force Israel to stop short of full destruction of the Iranian state and full regime change? I don't know the answer to that, honestly. I've had interesting conversations with some of my Israeli friends, and some of them will say, no, if the U.S. says stop, they'll stop. So, but my sense is that Netanyahu has got a much larger set of goals in mind, and I'm not sure he will stop.
People from realist geopolitical camp, they usually argue that even though international law exists, but if there is a strategic interest on behalf of the state, and the state actually has military political capabilities to fulfill this strategic goal, then the state should go against international law and might go against international law. And this is how the world actually works. And to build strong connections, strong relations, and secure peace, it is necessary not only to obey to international law, but it is necessary to build communication and relations in the way that both states are interested in peace rather than to be in the state of war. And this is something which is championed by John Mearsheimer, some other prominent figures in this camp. So do you agree with this premise?
No, I think the realists are wrong here. I think they're absolutely wrong. Look, the fact that, because the realists will say, look, there's no such thing as the rules-based order. There's no power at the level of the international system that can enforce the rules, and therefore the rules are irrelevant. And states just pursue their interests, and those interests are defined as military power or as security, which is gained through military power. Look, this is the same as arguing people break the speed limit all the time in the United States, for instance, and everywhere. The fact that people break the speed limit and sometimes do it with impunity, or the fact that people commit crimes, even minor crimes, and sometimes are not punished for it, does not mean that laws don't exist and that public order doesn't exist and that the rules don't exist. What it does mean is that, yes, sometimes people and sometimes states ignore the rules when it's in their interest. That doesn't make the rules irrelevant. And frankly, I think all states, the United States included, would be better off respecting and following international law, following what international institutions determine is fair, just, and legal, following norms of international conduct. Because the United States built this system, right? This is a system, what we call sort of the rules-based order or the liberal order, the Bretton Woods institutions. These are all things that the United States built in the aftermath of World War II, or the United States didn't build them by themselves, but they were the primary power behind the construction of these institutions and these laws, like the Geneva Conventions, which are being violated all over the world today. We did this because the experience of 2 world wars within 20 years was so traumatic, or within 25 or 30 years, was so traumatic and so deadly that we were determined never to repeat it again. And this set of laws, rules, and institutions was an attempt to make sure that that didn't happen again. My fear is that we're far enough temporally, we're far enough in history from that trauma that we've decided that the rules don't matter. And I think that puts us on a path to repeating that trauma of the first half of the 20th century again.
Let me share with you my concerns regarding regime change operation, which definitely is the goal by Israel and the United States, even though Israel probably wanted Iran stop to exist. But definitely we see that both United States and Israel, they are interested in regime change operation. Why? Actually, I'm concerned about this situation because today we heard Minister Lavrov, Minister of Russian Federation, who is again emphasized the goal of Russian invasion to Ukraine, which Russia calls special military operation. Actually, the United States calls as well a special military operation, which is conducted against Iran. And Lavrov is continuing to stressing about regime change and the goals which have to be fulfilled, which dictator Putin outlined several years ago when he started an invasion against Ukraine. So why I'm concerned? Because when there is no U.S. resolution behind the activities of Israel and U.S., then it means that it legitimize from my point of view, basically similar acts in different parts of the world, and actually it let's say, helps Putin to justify his invasion against Ukraine, because in both cases there was no any document or resolution handed down by the Security Council. So do you see here a problem when undermining international law leads to legitimatizing conflict in other zones?
My short answer is yes. It's a huge problem. I would look. The U.S. and Israeli joint operation against Iran and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I happen to be in Kyiv at the moment. They're not the same. I think there were far more compelling reasons for the military operation against the Iranian regime than there were for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Right? The Iranian regime had pursued nuclear weapons and may still have been. The Iranian regime supports terrorism around the world. The Iranian regime had a missile and drone program that was holding the entire region hostage. But the problem is the Trump administration, not only did it not go to the UN, it didn't go to any international body, nor did it even go to the U.S. Congress to pursue authorization to use military force. And the administration is arguing that the War Powers Resolution, so the U.S. Constitution does not require the president to seek Congress's approval to use the military, because in his role as commander-in-chief, he can do that. Okay. That is technically correct for at least 60 days of the operation, according to the U.S. law. After 60 days, the president does have to get congressional authorization. The problem is, in the past, all U.S. administrations have at least pursued international legitimization for military force, and have always, in recent history, pursued and received authorization from Congress. We got it for Afghanistan. We got it for Iraq. Afghanistan had both international and U.S. domestic authorization. Iraq, as you know, the U.S. famously went to the Security Council, attempted to gain Security Council approval, didn't get it, but then they did go to the Congress and get an authorization for use of military force. So this has none of that. And it does then, on the surface, it invites comparison with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Again, I think they're different. Ukraine was not a threat to Russia. Ukraine did not have a nuclear program. It was not threatening its neighbors. It was not about to join NATO. None of the Russian excuses for the invasion are true. They're all either completely made up or delusions of Putin's own mind. And the Iranian operation is different, but you're exactly right to note that on the surface, it invites comparison.
Yeah, and well, you got the point. Actually, this really scares me. Why? Because what we see now, and you just mentioned this point, President Trump, he's a strong unilateralist, so he doesn't like institutions. He doesn't like institutions inside the United States, and he doesn't like institutions outside the United States, so international institutions. So obviously, we understand that Iran represents a serious threat, and psychologically, maybe military operation against Iran is justified because Iran sponsored the terrorism against Israel. Iran misconducted many times and actually represents a serious threat to the Gulf states, some other states around, and psychologically or emotionally, this operation can be justified. But still, even though we know that this guy actually committed the crime, we still go to court. We file our claims. So there is another side, and the judge hand down the decision. Who is the judge in the international domain? UN Security Council. So because there was no any judgment regarding the launching an operation against Iran, now Russia comes up, let's say Minister Lavrov, and he represents an argument which is unjustified for you, unjustified for me. We consider this argument as a false argument by dictator Putin, but Putin, Lavrov, and some other guys in Kremlin, they justified, according to their own view, their invasion against Ukraine. So this is a serious problem because the Security Council, which is supposed to be let's say, above and hand down decision regarding these matters actually stepped away.
Yeah, and look, the Security Council was never going to authorize the U.S. And Israel to strike Iran because Russia would veto it, China would veto it. We know this. Nevertheless, it probably would have been useful to do what the Bush administration did, at least, and go to the UN and have the discussion in public about what is the justification for attacking Iran? What has Iran done to Israel, to the United States, and to its neighbors in the region? And the United States didn't even deign to go to the UN and have that discussion. Now, maybe people in the Trump administration would say, well, we didn't want to tip our hand and we didn't want to, make it clear that we were potentially going to attack Iran. But look, we had already attacked Iran last summer with the Israelis. So the Iranian regime was probably expecting the attack. I would say a couple of things. First of all, you noted that President Trump's a unilateralist. Yes, he is, until he needs help. And that's what's interesting is now he's saying that if our allies don't help us police the Strait of Hormuz, it's going to be really bad for NATO. We need to keep in mind, coming on the heels of early in this war, when he very dismissively talked about the potential for the UK, which is our strongest naval partner, frankly. It has the most capability of naval capability of any of our NATO allies aside from the US itself. He dismissed the idea of the UK sending ships to help patrol the Persian Gulf and said, we don't need them. That's when it looked like he thought, I think, that we were going to win a quick, short military victory. And he didn't want anyone else sharing in the glory. Now, suddenly, it's NATO's duty to help patrol the Strait of Hormuz and to potentially escort shipping through because it has been effectively closed. Whether or not the Iranians have mined it, and I don't think we know yet that they have the capability to mine it. They can use drones to strike ships. They've already struck several tankers. And so suddenly the unilateralist needs help. And now he's a multilateralist and he's threatening NATO. By the way, we put tariffs on all our NATO allies. We threatened NATO ally Denmark over Greenland. We criticized NATO for staying off the front lines in Afghanistan and implying that they didn't really help us in Afghanistan when we have allies that took hundreds of casualties, hundreds of deaths in Afghanistan. It's true that some allies had national caveats, right? Some allies didn't do some of the harder fighting. But you know what? The Brits did, the Danes did, the Canadians did. There were plenty of allies that fought and died for us in Afghanistan. And now we're threatening them over a war that the U.S. administration started without consulting NATO. And only a week or two ago, we were saying we didn't need NATO's help in. So
basically, just summing up our discussion, you agree with the fact that what is happening right now basically undermines an international rule order. So at the end of the day, we live now in the new reality. So let's say rule of law on international level has to be either fixed or replaced.
Yeah, look, everyone has known for 2 decades that the institutions that comprise the rule-based order, right, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, and all these other Bretton Woods institutions are in dire need of reform. They no longer correspond to the exigencies or requirements of the 21st century. They just don't. We know this. So then we need to work hard at reforming them and not try to throw them away on the altar of great power politics and on the altar of polarity, whether it's bipolarity, multipolarity, whatever. Because the only thing great power concerts ever mean is eventually they mean great power war. Every single, great power arrangement divide the world into spheres of influence. Everyone in history has eventually broken down into great power war. And so the only way, and the reason, I think at least, and many people I think would agree that one of the major reasons we did not have a great power war in the aftermath of the Second World War until now was the fact that we set up a system of laws, rules, norms, and institutions that helped states deal with their differences without going to war. right? People in political science, international relations talk about institutions do three things for states. One, they provide information. If you're in an institution, whether it's the UN or NATO or the EU, you see your interlocutors, you see the other states on a fairly regular basis, and that gives you information about their actual intentions and actual capabilities. So they provide information, they sanction defection. They're not perfect, but some institutions, like the World Trade Organization, can impose costs on members that break the rules. And then we will say, you'll hear people say they lengthen the shadow of the future. In other words, if you know you're going to have to interact with that state inside this institution multiple times over years and years, then you don't have the same incentive to cheat or defect as you would if it's a one-time interaction. We seem to have forgotten that institutions provide all these benefits. And we've just thrown them away on the altar of great power politics because we feel like we're the strongest country in the world right now. We were the strongest country in the world in 1945, too, and we took a very different lesson then. And I think the lesson that we took then and what the actions we took then were correct. And I think what we're doing now, frankly, is wrong.
Dr. Hamilton, thank you very much for your time, for your thoughts. Thank you very much for participating in this show. And see you next time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mihailo.